pair of hikers from Rhode Island have been rescued after getting stuck in treacherous terrain on Mount Washington.
At least one hiker expressed they were feeling symptoms of hypothermia. Officials tell us the hikers were brought to safety around 10 p.m. and thankfully, there were no injuries.
This was no drill, but a real-life emergency deep in the White Mountains.
Broadcasting from the Woodpeckers studio in the great state of New Hampshire, welcome to the Sounds Like a Search and Rescue podcast, where we discuss all things related to hiking and search and rescue in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Here are your hosts, Mike and Stump.
So we're episode 22 here, so we've had a year's worth of drinking, Stump. How are you holding up?
I'm doing okay. I think I can make it to 23, maybe 24.
I think you
at this
will
rate.
Past that, to be honest. But so we're going to talk about getting older here on the show. So, do you know, Stump? Like, if you look back, because you're no spring chicken anymore, but do you look at like a particular moment and say, like, wow, that was the moment when I realized that I was getting old?
Yeah, I do. Age is sort of a strange phenomenon and idea for all of us to contemplate. But I mean, for me personally, it was when I was in my mid-40s. I had just ran my last and fourth Mount Washington road race, and the next day I was running around my typical loop in Haverhill, Massachusetts. And when I got back to my car, I sat down on my seat and my left hip locked up on me. And that ended up being, I was in my mid-40s, and that was the beginning of this saga, this orthopedic saga that I've been through for the last several years of dealing with arthritis and things like that. So that was the moment that it kicked in, like, ooh, getting older, the joints are starting to act up. But I still had the mindset of an 18-year-old. And today I still do. So physically, orthopedically, things are changing, but my mind is still like just a little kid.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Like I've always, I don't think that I've matured much. Like I'm sort of in that 16 to 20-year-old mode, I think, with maturity. But I think definitely for me, I look back at it, I was thinking about this before this episode. So I was kind of thinking back to when my oldest daughter started driving. And I think when she pulled out of the driveway that first time when she had her license and I wasn't driving with her, I was like, wow, I remember looking in the mirror, and like that was right around the time where like I couldn't deny the gray hairs that were kicking in. So I think for me that was the moment, and now the kids just remind me of how old I am every day, so I can't forget.
Oh yeah, I mean, it gets worse. I mean, I think when you have that realization that you're getting older and things are, catching up with you and soon to surpass you in a sense, it gets quicker and quicker and quicker.
Yeah, well, it's not all doom and gloom, though, because when you look at it,
isn't.
Where we are, like, we're definitely staying active, so we don't have much to complain about here. But But tonight, the reason I bring this up, Stomp, is tonight that we're joined by Martin Pazzani, who's here to talk about the Fountain of Youth. So he's gonna help us out. And Martin
Pazzani,
yes. So Martin is an author. He's an entrepreneur, an accomplished mountaineer. So he's got some good stories about some far off places that I'm really curious about. And he's also an avid White Mountain hiker. So he's here to talk about his book, which is called Secrets of Aging Well, Get Outside. So Martin's going to share his perspective on aging, wellness, fitness, and how hiking is the secret to a long and healthy life. So I recently got a chance to read this book, and I really enjoyed Martin's perspective. So very excited to have him. And later on the show, we'll cover some recent search and rescue news, and we'll do a little bit of White Mountain history, talk about railroads. So very excited tonight. So I'm Mike.
And I'm Stomp. Let's get started.
Great. So Stomp, sponsors, coffees, anything, any updates there for our audience?
Buy Me a Coffee is active, and if you're in the mood to donate to the podcast, that would be fantastic. We're using this platform to offset our costs, and we have Reckless Brewery up in Bethlehem, which is our official sponsor for each show, and just amazing place, great beer, great ambiance, highly recommended. Reckless Brewery in Bethlehem.
Very cool. Yeah, I got to get up there. So we'll plan a trip for sure in the next couple of weeks, Stomp. Any recent hikes for you?
No, unfortunately, I'm a spicy Cheeto guy this week.
That's the part where you're supposed to go, what about you, Mike?
Well, I thought that was the part where you're supposed to say, wait a minute, what's a spicy Cheeto guy?
No, I know what you were talking about from last week. So. But you always do that whenever I say, like, okay, where'd you go for recent hikes? And you're like, I went blah, 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 blah. And you never ask me where I went.
Dude. You have to have listened to an earlier episode, but I did some research about the whole spicy Cheeto thing, and it's really interesting. I don't think we need to get into it, but yeah. So I'm the spicy Cheeto guy. I did no hiking this week, sorry. How about you, Mike?
Oh, thanks for asking, Stomp. I appreciate it. So yeah, I've been busy. So
really?
I took a trip up to the far north. So I was in Pittsburgh and Dixville Notch, New Hampshire. Have you been there? Have you ever been up that far north?
Not that far. I've gone up maybe the eastern side of the state on the main border up to Gooseye. That's probably the furthest north I've been, but not the western side.
Martin, have you been up to McGalloway or Table Rock up in that area?
I've done Table Rock, Mike, and spent some time back in the day in Dixville Notch. I love it there. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. It was. I was definitely pissing some people off because I was rubbernecking the whole time when I was driving up there, just because I've never been up there. So I took a Friday off, and I just was. I'm working on the 52 with a view and the terrifying 25 list, and I needed to get up there, and I was like, I'm going to try to get both of those hikes in a single day because I just was pressed for time. So I drove up and I hiked McGalloway Mountain, which is in Pittsburgh, New Hampshire, which is on the 52 with a view list. And that was number 51 for me, so I'm almost done with the list. But what an amazing, like, it's, Martin, you probably can give a perspective, but like it's not a, well, getting into McGalloway Mountain is more about the drive than it is the hike, because it's like maybe about a mile hike to get up to a fire tower and the ledges and whatnot. But like the drive in, you've got to go on this like forest or this logging road, and then there's another road that you have to drive maybe like 10 miles an hour for like 6 miles to get down, and eventually you get to this trail. But McGalloway it was a fun adventure. And
doesn't McGalloway have a slide?
It has ledges, so it's
Okay.
it's like a small, on the eastern side of it. It has like a ledges, and then it's like kind of a rock slide, but you couldn't climb up it. You would need to like
Rope up?
You would have to like, it's almost like a mini version of like Cannon Cliffs, but it's not,
Yeah, gotcha.
not super big. But it was fun. It was a fun adventure, but I was just nervous about my car breaking down and being out there with no cell connection. But then, so I drove all the way up to McGalloway, did that hike. I met like these 3 people that were hiking. Matter of fact, one of the people I met, I was kind of joking. I was like, oh, I wouldn't want to be stuck out here. You'd be waiting a long time for like a car or a rescue. And she had said, she was like, I actually had a recent rescue that I was involved, that I needed a rescue. So I was like, oh, you got to tell me the story. So she had gotten injured hiking Mount Tecumseh. So she's telling me the story. And she's like, oh yeah, I got injured. I couldn't walk. And she said they were able to get out to the ski slopes, and somebody that worked at Waterville drove like an ATV up and rode her down. And she was like, we were so happy because we didn't have to call like for a real rescue. They just rode us down on an ATV. So
That's funny because that's how we generally handle the ski resort side of it. If somebody is on that trail, they'll send officers up on ATVs and they'll pluck them out. So I'm wondering if it wasn't an officer or if it was somebody from Waterville.
Yeah, I don't know, but I was laughing. I was like, oh, that's a cool story. I was asking her what was going through her head, and she was like, I was mortified. Like, I don't want to. She's like,
Where is that
want
point?
anyone.
That's like a mile in. There's a hairpin. Then it goes straight up for about a mile and a half. And at that point, you can walk out onto the ski slope and look down onto tri-pyramids and whatnot. It's a really neat spot, but that's where they go. They'll try to get an ATV right to that corner.
Yeah, that must have been where they picked her up. So, but it was kind of cool to meet them.
That's
and
neat.
Then I drove down so I went to Pittsburgh, and then I drove to Dixville Notch, and I just pulled. I didn't do a lot of research on Table Rock, so I just kind of had to guess, and I pulled off at this in the middle of Dixville Notch. I just pulled off the road, and there was a parking area, and I found the trail. So, Martin, when you did Table Rock, do you remember? Did you do the climbers trail, or did you go the longer hike where you got to go 2 or 3 miles?
I think I did the longer hike. My whole purpose, truthfully, it wasn't a hike. I just wanted to look down at the balsams from that spot because that's when I first noticed the cliff. I was staying at the balsams, and I went, "Oh man, that's kind of cool. I wonder if you can get up there."
Yeah, and I actually,
Sure
so there's a longer hike, which you must have taken, but there's also they call it the climbers trail. So I went up, and it's maybe, I don't know, 600, 700 feet or something of climbing, and it was pretty steep. But then I got up on Table Rock, but I was getting a little dizzy being out there. It was a little freaky, but.
I don't remember when the list started, Terrifying 25, right? Or the 50, I think it's on both. Anyway, there were no lists when I did it. I'm guessing 19 when I went up there. So I just didn't even think about whether it was terrifying or anything. It was just, hey, I want to see what the balsams looks like from that ledge.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And you know what actually surprised me is I didn't know anything about the balsams. I've since done a little bit of research, but I was looking down on it, and I was kind of looking at it. So for the audience's sake, Table Rock is in Dixville Notch. It is this sort of narrow, it's probably about 6 or 8 feet wide, and then it drops down maybe about 500 or 600 feet. So it's really if you have vertigo, it's not a great place to be standing. But I was kind of clinging to the rocks and taking some video, and I'll post up some pictures on the show notes. But it overlooks this resort called the Balsam, and I think that is where they do the first presidential vote when the primaries happen. Oh no, it's actually the first
in the nation to vote, and there's 27 people in the town. And I had always thought that it was this nice fancy resort, but it's actually in disrepair right now. So it's not in disrepair, but it's not you can't go there anymore. I guess they've been trying to redo it.
Yeah, it's closed for renovation right now. It was luxurious. You know the history there of those 20-something grand hotels that were in New Hampshire, and I think 16 of them have burned to the ground. That's one of the remaining ones.
For sure.
And
amazing history.
In its day, it was grand for sure.
Oh yeah, I mean, it looks like it would be amazing, but I was kind of looking down at it, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, there's grass growing through the parking lot, and the swimming pool is not ready to go. But I think they're trying to get some investors to finalize the repairs, but they're trying to get a ski resort and everything going up there. So it would be really nice if they get that going. But it's a great trip for anybody that's interested. It's called Table Rock, Dixville Notch. Just don't get too close to the edge. So Stomp, you got to get up there at some point. And
well, talking about that edge, you're saying it was 8 feet wide. I mean, watching the video, it looked like it was 3 feet wide. And were you I laughed because all I could think about were the people that walk with their cell phones and fall down potholes in New York City and places like that. And all I was thinking was, Mike's looking at his phone as he's walking on this ledge.
And we do talk about that on social media a lot. There is this trend of these social media influencers that just fall off cliffs, and it seems like there's a news story every week. But I think
it could have been you.
Yeah, I mean, Martin will talk about this actually. So one of the things I do want to talk about with Martin is sort of the situational awareness that hiking develops within your brain. And I do think that there is something to be said for people that are out there frequently. It's not that I wasn't not paying attention to the video, but I was much more attuned to where I was with the rocks than I was with the video. But I definitely, my aunt and my mom yelled at me on social media, and they were like, "You're gonna fall and die." So But it's one of the more unique places in New Hampshire that I've been. But other than that, Stomp, I've been busy. I was on Mount Israel, so in the Ossipee Range. I just did a sort of a ride home hike, and I did Israel in the winter time, so I wanted to do it in nicer weather. So I got up there and just did a sort of a Sunday afternoon clear my head hike, and then I just did a trail run up on Pleasant Mountain, which is right by my in-laws' place in Maine. So I've been moving around, and then I'm gearing up for a Mahoosic traverse in the next week or two. So it should be fun.
So Israel from the south looks north towards Algonquin Trail and Sandwich Dome and Jennings and Tri-Pyramids if you're really looking, but that's a neat view.
Yeah, it's right. Like it literally looks right down the throat of where you live. It's like right into that area.
Yeah, that's cool. And just a side note, quick before we move on, I was talking to a friend that lives near Plymouth Mountain, and from the eastern side of Plymouth, there is a trail called the Mauglist Trail. Are you aware of this? The reason I bring it up because it may be one of these long trails that may have been abandoned or forgotten. The Mauglist Trail, Mowglis. We should do some research because there may be some room for people like Nobby or Rebecca to dive in and check it out. So from the western side of Plymouth, there are these old markers on the trees that are maybe like 2 inches by 4 inches that have the picture of a goat on them. And they go all the way down to Cosby Mountain, which is near Newfound Lake. So it looks like it may be a longer trail than I'm aware.
Yeah, I don't know. So maybe you can do some research on that, and we'll report back. I do know there's a Mauglist Trail on Mount Carrigain. So, but maybe it's different.
Okay, that would really extend it south.
Yeah, I don't know, but why don't you do some research and report back, Stomp?
Yeah, will do.
It's time for Slasher's Guest of the Week.
All right, so we're going to transition into our first segment here, which is welcoming Martin. So, Martin, I want to talk about like a recent hike that you just did. So I think you were down on the Appalachian Trail, right?
Yeah, I went south to the easiest part of the Appalachian Trail, roughly the halfway point. I was playing around Harper's Ferry, went into Maryland and into Pennsylvania. Pretty flat by New Hampshire standards, but interesting historically, and that's why I did it. I'm a Civil War fan, so the part of the Appalachian Trail that goes past there goes through some historic places. Got a chance to see Antietam and Gettysburg while I was walking around there in the 90-degree humid heat. But, it was a good hike. I did about 10 or 12 miles a day for 3-4 days and burned a lot of calories and saw some history. So, yeah, pretty good.
Nice. Now, do you have are you sort of goal-oriented in that you're section hiking the AT, or did you just pick that as a location to
I
check
like
out?
Harper's Ferry. I'm not doing the AT deliberately in sections. If I do it, I don't know that I have the personality to do 4 months on the trail. I don't think I could do it, but I like parts of it, and especially the New England parts. I've done most of the New England parts, but I really like Harper's Ferry, and it's got some meaning for me because when my son did the AT about 20 years ago, I met him there, and we spent some time there, letting him recharge his batteries, and I really got to like the area, so it's great.
Did you see a lot of through hikers, or so the bubble going south has not reached there yet, and then the bubble going north is far beyond there at this point. So I imagine you didn't see too many through hikers.
I saw one guy who was northbound, and I stopped in at there's a office there of the Appalachian Mountain Club, and I asked him about it. And he said the bubble has passed. Everyone going north is gone, and south is also gone. So. Yeah, it was quiet from a through hiker standpoint, but you can see the town is set up to be, very pro for through hikers. Places selling equipment and welcoming hikers. Yeah, it's a great little town. It really is. It's historic. It's scenic. It's hilly. It's the intersection of three rivers, so you got the water element there too. It's just a great place to be.
Yeah, I got to get down around that area soon to do some college tours. So I don't know if I'm going to be in that particular area, but I think maybe now closer to Asheville, North Carolina. But I'm interested in getting south and checking out sections of the AT. So that's a cool hike. So, Martin, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, a little bit about your career, and just overall how you got into hiking, and then I want to transition into a little bit of detail too about your experience hiking in the White Mountains.
Sure. I'm a business guy. My background is I'm a marketing guy, and I've been a big corporate guy, and now I'm an entrepreneur. I was born in Brooklyn, about the flattest place you can imagine. But my parents, also Brooklynites, had spent the years before I was born in the Alps. My dad was in the service, and he just fell in love with the Austrian and the Swiss Alps. Slides, pictures, whatever. So growing up, I saw pictures of that, and then we moved out of the city up to Connecticut, and then, of course, my father fell in love with, of all places, Franconia Notch. So from the mid-'60s, we've been going up to Franconia, doing the Clark's bear trading post, and standing under the old man of the mountains, all that whole, going through the flume. So I just, to me, Franconia Notch and the White Mountains up there, it's my home away from home. It's home base. And I don't know that I've missed more than 1 or 2 seasons since the 60s up there. Really, it's my favorite place to be when I need to chill.
Now, when you went up there, was it in a tent, or did you rent a house in that area, or how did you stay?
I would say 9 times out of 10, we were at Lafayette Place Campground. My dad loved camping, and we loved being out under the stars. And I think that's what it just got into me. It's second nature at this point. And I still go up every summer, set up the camp in Lafayette Place and run up to Lonesome Lake and do all the routes off of there. So it's maybe it's boring. I don't know. I just love it there, and I've done some of those hikes dozens of times. But I just love being there. I talked about my book, and I'll mention the reason I don't know if you recognize the cover picture, but I'm standing on Artist Bluff because I went up there when I was about 6 years old with my parents, and it's just it just gets under your skin, and I suspect it will stay there.
In your, with the hiking that you've done in the White Mountains, like you expanded over your lifetime, like you've actually done some legitimate mountaineering activity. You've even been to Antarctica. So we'll save those stories for a little bit later. But aside from just hiking, can you talk a little bit about this? You got some interesting backgrounds here. So you've been in marketing most of your career, but can you talk a little bit about some of the companies you've worked for and some of the things you've done in your business career?
Yeah, I'm pretty eclectic, and right out of college, I went to work as a marketing guy for Jose Cuervo Tequila. So I'm kind of been in the tequila business since 1979. And then I've been in the music business, but most relevant, and it's kind of why I wrote the book, is I've also been in the fitness business as chief marketing officer of 2 fitness companies, and started noticing the difference between workouts in a gym and the difference between what I knew was available to people through hiking. And it just started playing with me over the years. And so, I'm still a business guy. I'm an entrepreneur, actually. I'm chairman of a fitness company right now, and we're doing some interesting stuff. But the consistent message for me is I'm very attuned to the anti-aging aspects of fitness, especially hiking. My company and my avocation in the book are all about the physiological benefits of hiking. And that's what's really drawn me. I kind of made it a mission. Even though I'm still in a couple of other businesses, I see what I'm doing right now in the fitness and anti-aging area is kind of what I'd like my legacy to be. It's very important to me. And I just turned 65. This summer was the 50th anniversary of my first climb of Mount Washington with my dad and my brother. And you're talking about when you first realize you're aging. It's been a while. But on the other hand, I'm very much into resisting the fact that I'm aging. I really believe that you can delay physical and cognitive aging through fitness, and our perception and our thinking about what we're experiencing, with aging is in the process of changing. You know, a generation ago, 65 was old. You should be retired. And I don't know if you've noticed it, but there was an 80-year-old guy who got to the top of Mount Everest, and there's a guy who just did rim to rim in the Grand Canyon who's 84. I mean, I believe it's what's in your head matters, and we were kind of programmed to slow down in your 60s a generation ago. And if you just tell yourself that you don't have to do that, you can actually stay active, and in the process of doing that, age better and live longer, happier, healthier, be fitter and be healthier. You know, to me, the key thing is what fitness provides you is it's kind of a resisting the maladies of aging. All the things that, you know, create death and decline can be delayed through fitness. And there's nothing better than hiking for doing that.
Yeah, and I've had a couple of aha moments where I've been out in hiking and been exposed to some people that I thought were much. I came away from that experience feeling like, wow, there's possibility here. And one experience was just sort of the exposure to, I forget this guy's last name, but his name is George, and he runs the Mount Washington Road Race. So Stomp and I have talked about this multiple times, and Stomp knows who I'm talking about. But George has, you know, I think he ran the Mount Washington Road Race up until he was 99 years old. And then the other sort of aha moment for me was I think the first time I hiked out to Bond Cliff, I met a lady and I was talking to her, and, you know, she looked like she was in her mid 60s, nice lady. And, you know, somehow we got to talking, and she had thrown in that she was like 84 years old or something. So I've had those experiences on trail, and obviously I think my first reaction when I see those is, wow, I hope they don't keel over and have a heart attack. But then when you kind of think about it a little bit, it sort of does say, like, you know, it sort of does hit you to say, like, this is possible. It's just, I think one of the things I'm curious to hear from you is, like, how do you get there? Because I'm, you know, in my I'm getting close to 50 now, and I think, you know, I'm definitely starting to think about aging a lot more than I used to.
Actually, all the research I've done says late 40s, 50 is about when your mind starts to change. So you're right at the perfect age for rethinking all that stuff. But, you know, you mentioned the aha moment, and you probably remember in my book I talk about it. I was training, and I used to use Mount Washington as a training ground for bigger mountains. Once I mastered Mount Washington, it just became, a great way to get 4,000 vertical feet in, or 8,000 if you did it twice in one day. So I'd probably been up at 100 times at least. I was about 33 years old, feeling my oats. I had just pretty much jogged up Lionhead Trail, turned around, came back down. I was on the rock pile. And I look ahead and I see somebody running up over the top of Lionhead. I'm literally pretty fast paced. And this is before trail running was even a thing. You know, there's just a guy running up the hill. Yep. And I'm looking at him, dumbfounded at how fit he was, because I thought I was the cock of the walk. And here's this guy jogging up the hill. And as he got to me, my jaw dropped, because he looked old enough to be my grandfather. And I found out when he stopped and said, hey, he was 75 years old. And here I am, 32, thinking I own this mountain, and he's running uphill. And I said, hey, how are you doing this? And he gave me the beginnings of this journey I'm on. He said, I live just down the street. I've been doing this 2 or 3 times a week for like years. And it's the fountain of youth. That's what he said. And he said, I'll catch you later, son. And he just went up the hill. And I'm looking over my shoulder at this 75-year-old guy jogging up the rock pile. And my mind was totally blown. I wasn't thinking about my grandfather at the time. He could barely walk up a flight of stairs. And it's got me to thinking about how that's possible, why, and can you actually do something about it? Can you take charge of the way you age? And I almost, not deliberately, but it grew on me. I made it kind of like a mission. I was happy that I could be doing it for that long if I managed to, but I really wanted to know why, and then how you could help other people to do that as well. And that's the reason I wrote the book, is that guy.
Yeah, and I've seen more and more of those older folks really getting out there and getting it done, and the more I hike. So I'm sure that people listening here have had their own aha moments and experiences interacting with folks on the trails. So I do want to get into some of the themes that you cover in the book, but before we get into that, I think you've given a good overview about sort of your perspective on the White Mountains. But I always ask this question to people whenever they're on the show is, have you ever been sort of in a situation where you feel like you came close to needing a search and rescue, or have you been involved with a search and rescue before?
Well, I mean, I've twisted an ankle numerous times out there, but I walk it off. So no, personally, I've never needed a search and rescue. Although I have to tell you, being part of your Facebook group, every day I think I'm overdue. I'm going to be the guy in the getting carried down at some point, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed I'm not. And I'm taking a lot of precautions to make sure I'm not. But yeah, I was actually just accidentally involved in a search and rescue 3 or 4 years ago. It was February 2016, because I looked it up today because I knew you were going to ask me about it. Yep. On Frankenstein Ledge, playing around in the ice up there. And just some guy took about a 10-foot fall and broke his leg. And he managed to limp down to the trestle at the bottom of Frankenstein Ledge where the tracks are. And then someone called in for some SAR, and I helped carry him out. And it was great. It was, well, not so great for the guy, but it was really interesting to see that in action. And I was really impressed with the professionalism, the speed, the strength, it just made me feel really, really good about being in the White Mountains and how professional that was. And now watching what, we're all following along on Facebook, it's a magnificent thing that's there. And I'd love to see it better supported. So good,
Yeah, it's so that's cool. So you got a little bit of a vibe about I've never. So Stomp's on search and rescue. I'm not on search and rescue, so I've never got the chance to sort of get involved in it. And Stomp's described Stomp, you talk about how it is to carry somebody on a litter, but it's probably a good experience for anybody that's been hiking to sort of get exposure to what it takes to carry somebody out, even if it's not a long distance.
Yeah, like Chris said last episode, just put 60 pounds in your pack and walk around for a while.
There you go. But it's funny. The Facebook vibe is sort of critical of, I guess, our fascination with the accidents out there and the rescues and all that stuff. On the other hand, what drew me to what you guys are doing on Facebook is, maybe you don't know this exists, but in the 70s or 80s, for a long time, there's a periodical that still comes out occasionally called Accidents in North American Mountaineering. And every climber subscribed to it because of the idea that you could learn from other people's mistakes. And so that's what pulled me into your group at the beginning, was I thought learning what's going on up there, not being snarky about it necessarily. Sometimes it's deserving of some snark, but on the other hand, I see it as a learning experience. You get smarter and better about being out in the wilderness when you see what other people have done and how you can avoid that happening to yourself.
Yeah, I agree, and I've definitely evolved over time. Like, it used to just be sort of a joke, like, oh, let's look at those people that got in trouble on the mountain. But exactly what you said is like, let's take a look at this. Let's put a little bit of data collection behind it and analyze how, what themes pop up, and are there ways that you can look at those themes and say, okay, maybe I can bring a splint with me to deal with lower leg injuries, or I can ensure that I've got an extra headlamp just in case I run into somebody that doesn't have a headlamp. So it's valuable. It's sort of like, sometimes it can be depressing when you fixate on it a little bit, but it's a fun area to think about, especially if you're an avid hiker. So. But Martin, I wanted to get into a little bit about what led you to write this book. But before you get into that, can you define for the audience what you view as an anti-ager? What exactly is that? And then maybe if you could just transition from that to talk a little bit about what led you to write the book.
Yeah, anti-ager is a person usually about baby boomer age who is defying aging by staying fit and living an active, vital lifestyle years beyond what the mainstream thinks is possible. I have a business colleague that is 85 and still goes into the office every day, sharp as a tack. I have my entire company, my fitness company, half the people are above 60. Entrepreneurs working long hours, building a company. And I go to a conference every year. I was the keynoter this year at a thing called the Functional Aging Institute, which is a group that specializes in training trainers to train people above age 50. And that's every single person there is an anti-ager. It's a remarkable group of people who are developing techniques and lifestyle elements and nutritional elements to age younger, to basically stay active and vital as long as possible. And it's not just about lifestyle. The truth is, the fitter you are, and maybe you know this, the number one reason people go into financial distress in their late years is illness. The fitter you are, you're able to offset all kinds of things that create financial problems and healthcare problems. So there's a financial benefit to being fit and not getting sick. In numerous ways, it's the best preventive medicine there is. And as far as fitness, as far as hiking goes, as far as I'm concerned, fitness is safety. And you always want to be safer. You always want to have that extra little gas in the tank if you need it. You want to be stronger than you need to be. You don't want to be crawling out of your adventures on your knees to get to your car. You want to give yourself a little bit extra. And so fitness is safety.
Got it. And one of the things you wrote in the book that I found was interesting, and it hit home to me, was you talk about this theory of aging where you want to live long and die fast. So it sounds a little bit morbid, but it does make sense. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, not only does it sound morbid, the actual name of it is called compressed morbidity.
Yep.
So what that basically means is, if you manage to stay fit and active and vital and don't go into the normal decline of aging where you get sick and you're in and out of hospitals, if you manage to avoid that through fitness, what happens is, you're 99, you're in your 90s, and then you get pneumonia and you die in 3 days. And that's a much better way to go, to me, than to linger for a long time in a diminished state. My two parents, they both were smokers, and they went through the last 10, 15 years of their lives was not a good thing. They were in and out of hospitals, surgeries, expensive procedures, time-consuming, emotionally consuming for everybody. Yet on the other hand, compressed morbidity, you have a happy, involved, vital life for longer years. You're not spending all that money on doctors. You're not involving your family. And then you just drop dead. And that's the way I want to go. You don't linger around. And you really have no way of knowing how many years you're going to get. I mean, I'm constantly reminded, you may recall this, maybe you guys are too young, but the guy who wrote the complete book of running, Jim Fixx, which created the jogging phase, died of a heart attack at age 50, right? So, I mean, this guy was super fit. So you just never know how many years you're going to get. Frankly, you can get hit by a car, or you could fall down the stairs in your house tomorrow. But I intend, my goal is to not retire until I'm 80 and to keep walking uphill until I'm older than that. I don't have any plans to slow down, and I want to make sure that I'm not only having fun and being active, but I'm productive. Because the reason for that is, if you stop all that stuff, being productive, working, I think you go into decline. Haven't you ever seen anybody who says, I'm retiring at 63, and then all of a sudden you see them a year later and they just seem slower. They seem like they're just not as sharp as they used to be. And that's because they're not using their brains anymore. And they're probably moving less.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. But actually, before I get into that, Stomp, you're as a physical therapist, you're exposed to a little bit of this sort of on the end of so Martin's idea, and I think it's a good one, is that the more physically fit you are, the more you can be preventative. The better you'll recover when you actually do get injured, but also it avoids sort of that long decline. But what are your thoughts on this, Stomp? Does this resonate with you?
Yeah, there are multiple factors: diet, genetics, environmental influence, whether you've been exposed to environmental toxins and whatnot. But for the most part, keeping active is the key denominator in terms of health and longevity. I mean, as a PT, I will dissect somebody's gait pattern if they're shuffling their step length. There's research to show that if you have a full step and you're not shuffling, then you're going to live longer. I mean, So activity is key, but there are multiple factors that influence that.
Yeah, and Martin, you're, one of the other things that I found interesting was your take on retirement. So I'm sort of, I would probably term myself as sort of pretty typical, as I'm like looking at my 401k, looking at 65 and saying like, okay, I'm going to retire. Maybe I'll move down to Florida, come between Florida and New Hampshire or whatever, and stop working. But like I think very early on in the book, you say like, don't do that. Like keep working, keep engaged. And it sounds good, but like, I'm in the sort of the corporate world myself, and I don't know if I can hold on for much longer than 15 years at the pace that I'm doing when it comes to work. But can you talk a little bit about your view on retirement and maybe give your perspective on, you're hearing me basically say like, I don't know if I can keep working after 65. What do you say to that?
When I say don't retire, I don't mean don't change your career. I don't mean do the same thing you did when you were 50.
Yeah.
There's a lot of thought being given now, and there's actually some schools cropping up to teach people in their 50s and 60s how to reinvent themselves for their 70s and their 80s. So a lot of people turn to consulting. If you have a hard physical job, like my dad was a fireman, I don't blame him for retiring at 60. It was tough, but if you have a desk job, you're not physically wasted. So you can do other things. You can become a consultant. You can write a book. There's a lot of things you can do that aren't the 9-to-5 grind of corporate life, which I know well. I kind of did it myself. I became an entrepreneur. I used to spend 100+ nights a year in a hotel traveling on 6 continents when I was a corporate guy. And yeah, that burns you out badly. And I did burn out. And, it contributed to actually a period of time where I wasn't very active. And I gained about 40 pounds and I was miserable and wasn't hiking, wasn't walking. And actually an attempt to do a hike where I really crashed badly convinced me that what I had to do was get back on the wagon and start walking again. So yeah, it's hard to maintain that level of intensity and activity for a really long time. So you go through ebbs and flows, and then but by not retiring, by being physically fit, you are empowered both physically and cognitively not to retire, to keep being productive. And I think it's a giant waste of time that people will get into their 60s and not use all that experience in some productive way and just call it quits. Because, right now, I feel like I'm at the height of my powers. I'm still physically active, and I've got 40 years of business experience to apply to solving problems. That's kind of a good thing. That didn't exist a generation ago, because by the time you were 60, you were put out to pasture. And some big corporations are still doing that. Right now they're looking to wean themselves of people above 55, actually. And so that's actually creating a whole new movement of entrepreneurship in people who are above 50. And we're going to see that in the next generation. A lot of people my age and older are starting companies and starting new businesses and creating new careers.
So what's your take on the new trend for these ultra events like Spartan and this and that? Because what I'm seeing as a PT is increased injury, increased wear and tear. I think a lot of these folks may be very well headed towards functional disability because they're overdoing it in their early years. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I have a lot of friends who were marathoners in their 20s and 30s. Every single one of them has got a hip replacement or a knee replacement. Some of them died too soon. I think there's overdoing it with high mileage. I think there's some research that shows that is not a longevity factor. It is a longevity denier. And I feel the same way actually about trail runners. If I were going to reinvent myself, I'd want to be an orthopedic surgeon, just specializing on replacing the hips and knees of the trail runners who are out there. I mean, you know how brutal that is, right? But how much stress you put on yourself running downhill? Oh my God. Those guys, some of those people are going to need hips and knees way sooner than they think.
Yeah, it is funny that you say that, because that is, and Stump, we've talked about this before, but like for me, I was a reasonably competitive runner, and I had all these ideas around like, all right, I'm going to run Boston qualifying times, and like I had the speed to do it, but my problem when it came to marathons was that I would break down in the training. So when I had to do those 16 to 18 mile training runs at 7:15 pace, like I could do it a couple times, but then I would break down. And I think that's one of the appealing things when I did that first hike up to Glen Boulder, and I realized like, oh wow, hiking gives me sort of this like energy, and I can, the list will allow me to sort of be somewhat competitive around hiking. Like it sort of scratched that itch. And I definitely think I had gotten injured too many times running, and I definitely think that like my involvement in hiking is what has stopped like the IT band and the Achilles tendonitis and the plantar fasciitis that I was dealing with all the time when I was running. Like that all went away when I slowed down and started hiking. So I do agree that like, these people that are super competitive ultra runners, like I think they're just, sometimes they can push it too much.
Definitely.
Yeah. Martin, one other thing I wanted to talk about, because this is something that like it really is concerning to me, and I see this like from family and friends, and I see it like sort of culturally as well, is one of the things you also talk about in your book is sort of this perspective about how people think that there's a pill for everything, and they think that like they can magically sort of shortcut their way into healthy lifestyle. And clearly like hiking is an activity where there's no shortcuts. You've got to go uphill. But can you talk a little bit about your perspective there and, what you think is going on with that?
Mike. I look out there and I see people always looking for that shortcut, thinking there's a pill for everything, not willing to put in the work to prevent things from happening in the first place. And fitness is the ultimate preventive medicine, right? And one of the things we're trying to do with our company is to reinvent fitness as upstream preventive healthcare. And when I say upstream, what I mean is this. The current preventive healthcare business isn't really preventing anything. It's not curing anything. It's maintaining things. Like for instance, if you have high blood pressure, the medication for high blood pressure doesn't cure you. It just moderates it a little bit. Whereas losing 50 pounds and getting your cardiovascular system geared up, that's a cure. That's prevention. And that same approach applies to almost every aspect of physical health. Cognitive decline can be delayed and reversed through fitness. Cardiovascular problems can be delayed and reversed. And in this era right now, the funny thing is, it's not getting enough publicity, but I think if you think about the comorbidities of the COVID problem, people with multiple comorbidities were more susceptible to COVID. People who were fit and didn't have cardiovascular problems and were not obese and did not have high blood pressure, they had a
Martin, we don't want to get the podcast banned, okay? You got to.
Yeah, okay. I won't go there, but I'm kind of down on where healthcare and medicine is right now, because I believe we should be focused more on prevention. And I'm my company and my team, we're trying to play a role in getting people to see that you can prevent almost all these things through lifestyle choices and being fit and moving.
I really appreciate that. I mean, honestly, I sort of came into this as, I'm in the confessional now. I came into this sort of skeptical, like, okay, where's this conversation tonight going to go? And just the current climate everywhere has just been so toxic. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. That's awesome to hear. There needs to be more of that, just natural health, whether it be vitamins and health and getting outside and exercise. You just don't hear enough of the natural approaches to building up your immunity and everything else. And that's really great. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's the angle. And, I'm sorry if I turned negative, but I think these are choices, individual choices people make. And I would like to figure out ways, and I think some of this is, like you wanted me to talk a little bit about shortcomings of the fitness business. Some of this is the fitness industry has turned off more people than it's turned on, believe it or not, because it's chased them away from fitness. It's made it hard for some people who need it to join. And that's one of the reasons I'm high on hiking, is because, there's no social pressure. There's no there's no judgment going on, in hiking. Technically, you're out there in the woods by yourself. But, you go into a health club and you're being stared at and you're being looked at, a trainer's evaluating you. There's a lot of judgment going on. And that's one of the reasons people don't join, is they don't want to be judged. They don't want to be viewed.
Yeah, and it's so true, because like I mean, I've definitely, I've had gym memberships in the past, and you pull into the parking lot, you see people getting in and out of their cars, you sort of make assumptions about sort of their social economic status, you take a look at their, their physical fitness, and you'd make assumptions. The beautiful thing about hiking is that most of the times, like, yeah, you'll see people in the trailheads or whatever, but like, nobody, that stuff all goes out the window, because you're all sort of on the trail, and nobody knows what you do for a living, or what your sort of political persuasion is, or what your other interests are. It's just a common sort of appreciation of nature. And even people I know that are like, I've known for a long time, like, I don't know a lot about them outside of just hiking. So it's been great that all those other societal sort of impressions are out the window. But like in a gym, I feel like there's sort of a hyper focus on it sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's gotten a little bit too much. I used to do a talk in fitness conferences that Arnold Schwarzenegger did more to hurt the fitness industry than help it, because he made a lot of people who were not, who just didn't get into the big grunting weightlifting kind of lifestyle, and didn't like hanging around that crowd. And the image that he projected chased a lot of people away who were after a different kind of fitness. But fortunately that's changing. Again, active agers are playing a role in doing that, because they're seeing through that. And fitness is now changing from weightlifting to a thing called functional fitness, which is a much more useful kind of fitness, actually, especially as you get older.
Yeah, and one of the things I did want to talk about is there was a moment in your book, and you touched on this earlier, where you had put on some weight, you were sort of in that corporate grind, and you tried to go for a hike and you just sort of hit the wall. And I had a moment like that in my early 20s, which motivated me to get back into running. My moment sort of was a self-motivation to say, like, this is who I am and this is what I'm going to do. Your explanation in the book around what motivated you is sort of you pulled sort of from within your own past experience to say, I'm going to get back to who I was. How do you get that motivation onto your friends or your loved ones if you're looking at them and saying, you know what, you're going down a path of, where you're gonna live a painful life if you don't get back into some level of fitness? Like I think some people just sort of have an inherent sort of drive to make it happen, but how do you motivate others to want to get fit if they're not in a place where they need to be?
I think that motivation is different for everybody. It's hard to have one answer to that, but a lot of it has to do with setting small little goals. If you set a big goal, like if you're going to go from unfit to, I want to climb Mount Everest in 2 years, you're going to find it's harder than saying, hey, you know what, I'm not fit right now, but I want to be able to run a mile in 2 months. And set little baby step goals and just keep increasing them. The good thing about this quantitative self movement, Fitbits and Apple Watches, is it's a good way to measure yourself against yourself. And that's a good way to set little goals. So, baby steps, little goals, that empowers you. If you can increase your running speed or your distance by 10% a week or 10% a month, you've accomplished something, and that feeds off itself. And as you go down that path, you feel better each time. And at some point, those endorphins kick in and you want more. And that's the progression from walking to hiking smaller trails to then wanting to hike bigger hills, wanting to do the 4,000-foot peaks, and maybe wanting to go beyond that. It builds layer by layer by layer. Especially as you're getting, up in years. Sometimes it's possible for an 18-year-old to set very high goals and get there very fast, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about middle-aged people who are maybe gotten themselves into a rut, and you just can't you just can't flip on a switch. And now, in some cases, a trauma is that switch, though. In some cases, it is a recovery from an injury or a cardiac incident or a friend going through an incident. Sometimes there is a switch, but more often than not, it's It's a subtle process, and sometimes it's hanging out with friends. Sometimes it's setting a goal that you want to see that view you saw on Facebook for yourself. I see that happening a lot now. So it's hard, but my recommendation as a coach, and I have a lot of personal trainers I work with. It's all about taking small steps and gradually turning the volume up and building your confidence, and that feeds you. That feeds off of itself.
Yeah, and I think, as much as people sort of get down on social media and they get down on sort of list hiking in the New England area, I do think that having these 4,000 footers and the 52 with the views and the terrifying 25s and the social media groups, like you said, I do think that it's that carrot that you can dangle out in front of people to say, like, okay, if you want to be part of that club, it doesn't really matter what motivates them. It's the fact that, like, if it does appeal to them, it's a good thing. So
yeah, you get a patch to put on your pack, right? I mean, that's kind of a goal for some people.
Yeah, exactly. And that patch may equate to an extra 5 years of living.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Couple of other things I wanted to ask you specific about the book. One other area that you had sort of talked about was this concept of getting outside your comfort zone in order to grow. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the comfort zone is easy to get lulled into, right? It's safe, it's comfortable, it's on the couch, you got Netflix, and you don't feel threatened. I've never really not been in a period when I didn't really want to challenge myself to do better or more. And so I've gone through periods where I keep pushing it. And in the book, I talk about a concept of a crucible. If you actually take this concept of getting out of your comfort zone into a place where it's either very risky or very challenging, it's like trial by fire. You're reforging yourself into something new. And when I was in my 20s and 30s and even 40s, I did that on a regular basis. That's when some of my riskier mountaineering adventures came in. I was deliberately looking for ways to practically kill myself to make myself a better version of me. And you see that now, like a lot of extreme athletes are doing that. I mean, people have taken it to levels that I would have thought were impossible in terms of challenging themselves and breaking out of the comfort zone and going through this process of trial by fire in a crucible. It's an interesting growth process, and of course, you can get injured and people are getting killed doing it. But if you learn how to do it properly, and add skills layer by layer by layer, it doesn't seem as risky when you're doing it. Like you were talking about the mental focus to walk out on table ledge, right? Table rock.
Yeah.
Well, you can teach yourself how to do that so that you're comfortable doing it. Whereas a rookie who had never done it before walking out there, you'd be vertigoed off the cliff, right? So you can layer by layer teach yourself to exceed your limitations.
So this is where I struggle a lot. Like, let's take an individual like Alex Honnold, who free solos El Cap, I absolutely appreciate the fact that he was a master. He was prolific. He got every finger hold, every toe hold, everything possible, and did this for 2 or 3 years and nailed it. But then you have that stark contrast about, there's no room for error. Just one wrong calculation and you're done. It's amazing to me. I mean, that's sort of where this goes. It's like people are pushing it to the limits, but there's a high price to pay if you make a mistake.
Yeah, no question. When you're talking about those giant vertical walls, that's it doesn't get any more extreme than that, as far as I'm concerned, both mentally and physically. And let's face it, those guys, before they give themselves those mental skills, they are physically gifted.
Sure.
So they're making the most of those physical gifts. That I recognized early on. I tried to become a really good rock climber. I kind of maxed out at 5'9" because I realized I wasn't physically set up for that. I'm not a gymnast. I'm kind of a heavier guy, and I was never going to be a ballerina on the rock. So I reset my goals for tall peaks, which is what I could use my physical skills at. And I think that's what people have to do. If you aspire to something like that, you have to be brutally honest with yourself. I mean, some people aren't meant for climbing 513 rock walls. And not everybody's made for getting to the top of Mount Everest either. And so you have to kind of assess and try things out and get feedback, and also get feedback from either a coach or friends or peers, and sort that out. So it's a fun process. That's what it was for me, always a process. How far can I push myself without killing myself, and be realistic about it.
So you need mentors, you need people around you to nurture you and support you and tell you when you're really blowing it.
Well, without a doubt, in every human endeavor, whether it's learning to play the piano or getting a perfect tennis serve, or you need a coach. And I left this out when we were talking about ways to motivate people. Sometimes it's a coach that does it. Really good personal trainers are just outstanding people to hang around with or have in your equation, because they can tell you what you need, honestly, if they're the right kind of coach. And for just every endeavor, you do need a coach. So I'm very much, if you want to excel at something, you can't do it. It's hard to do it on your own. Very few people can.
Yeah, and I think, Stomp, I would say, like, in your case, like, we've got obviously like Casey and Jimmy and the crew of friends that we hang out with, and I feel like you've gone out of your comfort zone, and like everybody sort of just circled around and said, like, okay, we sort of pushed it a little bit too hard there, and then you sort of contract a little bit, and then you do sort of the next crazy thing, and then when you feel like you step a little bit too deep, it seems like you're especially with these bushwhacks that you do, like you are constantly finding a new way to challenge yourself within the whites. But at some point, we got to get you out of the whites and get some challenges somewhere else.
I suppose the whites haven't failed to satisfy my my lust for adventure. That's for sure. It's funny. It's funny you say that, though, because, Martin, I'm getting the impression that you're an accomplished technical climber and this and that. And honestly, for me, that's where I draw the line. With search and rescue, I've seen too many accidents and injuries, technical climbing, in reference to search and rescue, that I've just made the personal decision that, I'm happy with my feet on the ground, and I'm probably okay with not diving into climbing at this point. You've done
you did that acceptance yourself, right? You're realistic with yourself, and it's also what you want. I mean, there's no it's not a contest, right? So good for you. It's great.
Yeah. It's a journey for everybody. It's an individual journey.
Yeah, and Martin, I want to get into some of this mountaineering experience that you've had in Antarctica as well. But one other thing I wanted to cover from the book is, so my biggest personal fear is, and I hope that like 15, 20 years from now, my kids aren't listening to this podcast and saying like, oh, wow, Dad's biggest fear came true. But like my biggest fear is the sort of cognitive decline, sort of a long extended cognitive decline into like Alzheimer's or something like that. So you, in your book, you talk about this, and I have a friend, my friend Tom, and I love him, God bless him, but like I always have said to Tom, like I joke around and say like, your situational awareness is so much different than mine. Like we'll be running on the Esplanade and he's like Mr. Magoo, and I'm like, my head's on a swivel. So I've always felt like hiking and running and cycling and those activities sort of give your sense of situational awareness in your brain a sharpness that you can't get otherwise. I almost liken it to like, especially trail running when you're, you're moving pretty quickly. You've got to make those split-second decisions on where to place your feet. And it's like almost like a real live video game. And can you talk a little bit about how you feel like hiking activates your brain and the benefits that you get from that?
Well, you're speaking to one of the core breakthroughs of neuroscience in the last decade. It is absolutely doing what you think it's doing, Mike. You're activating your brain because here's how it works. There's a thing called neurogenesis. Our body makes brain cells as a normal human process. You used to think you were born with a finite number of brain cells and that you only could kill them by drinking and boxing, right? And age. But no, at any age, your body makes brain cells. Now, here's the thing. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Stomp was just jumping in there saying, like, if brain cells get killed by boxing and drinking, he's in big trouble.
I thought you couldn't hear me. That was the trouble. Okay, here's the deal. So, but here's the good news, Stomp. The fact is, your brain is still making brain cells. You can rebuild it. It is a thing called neuroplasticity. And what happens is, and here's what triggers it. If you regularly get your heart rate to 66% of max, your body creates a hormone called BDNF. It's called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. That hormone travels through your bloodstream. It lands in your brain. It is the building block for new brain cells. Now, it doesn't automatically build your brain until you show it something to do, like cognitive challenge, cognitive load. That's either thinking, learning a new language, doing algebra, or giving it complex body movements to attach itself to, proprioception. When you give your brain, your body, when your brain gives your body complex commands, like, as you just mentioned, trying to keep your balance on uneven terrain, uphill or downhill, your eyes, your balance, all your muscles, keeping yourself upright, are engaged in this rapid fire sensory process, which actually builds brain cells. Not only brain cells, but it builds neural pathways. Neural pathways are alignments of cells that control the way your body moves. Those neural pathways create a thing called cognitive reserve. Cognitive reserve is basically extra brain power. And so the more cognitive reserve you have, and this has been studied in famous studies all over the world, the more cognitive reserve you have, the more you're capable of offsetting the decline of aging. Your brain actually can rebuild itself, and you can survive even if you have Alzheimer's plaques in your brain. If you have more cognitive reserve, you're able to offset that, and your normal behavior, your conversation, the way you behave, will not change or will be diminished very slowly. So it's a very powerful thing. And I've been studying this. This is what my company does, is we do a thing called dual tasking, which challenges people above 50 to build their brains, right? And we've been studying this for a decade. To me, there's nothing better than hiking for doing dual tasking, which means it's the best brain exercise I've ever seen, which is why I call it the fountain of youth.
Wow. Well, I'm all in on the hiking, and I'm hoping that the research that you're doing and the concepts that you covered in the book are going to get me to, what do you think? Like 95 healthy, and then I just drop dead around 100 or something like that? Is that the end? Is that the best case scenario, Martin?
Fastest growing part of the population is people above 100 right now. Did you know that? The number of people, centenarians, it's growing double digits, and that's because they're staying active, they're staying cognitively challenged, and people are starting to catch on to this. Be physically fit as you age. Did you know that half the population and 2/3 of the wealth are above age 50 now? And that particular demographic segment has reinvented many categories as it's passed through. And I'm expecting to see 70, 80-year-olds regularly exceed the limitations that we thought 40 and 50-year-olds couldn't do. I'll give you a perfect example. When I first started getting interested in Mount Everest, there was a period where if you were above 50, they might not let you do the trek into base camp, much less climb the mountain. 50 was considered like the hurdle. Okay? I just told you an 80-year-old guy climbed it last year. I went to base camp and above at age 64 at 18,000 feet. And that's not even unusual right now. Not unusual at all. And I went there with the intent of training to climb Mount Everest this year. So the limitations of age are being really crushed right now by a lot of people.
Yeah, and I want to transition into some of your mountaineering adventures. So I think, can you get into a little bit about your story about Mount Everest? Because I'm fascinated. Like, I've watched tons of documentaries, and it's sort of always been on my list. Like, I don't realistically think I would ever want to climb Mount Everest, but the idea of sort of the base camp trek from Kathmandu to base camp has always been appealing to me. When you went to Everest, was your plan to actually summit, or were you just doing the trek to base camp to sort of get a sense of what it's like?
Okay, I got to give it some context. When I was younger, I was right in the middle of that 7 summits thing. All my friends were doing the 7 summits, the tallest peak on each continent, right? I've got a lot of friends who have done all 7. I've done 5. And Everest was always the elusive one because it's a big commitment, 3 months off usually, and a year's worth of training, which means pretty much you're going to isolate yourself from family and friends, and then you're going to disappear for 3 months, and you might get yourself in a lot of trouble. So it was always, to me, probably not. When I was in my prime 30s and 40s, I look back and I probably could have done it then. And then you lost some of your skills and you do put on some age. And so I went back 2 years ago to base camp with the intent of seeing how my 64-year-old body did at altitude to determine if it was worth the effort to try it at age 65 or age 66. And especially because, now I hate to say it, it's not as hard as it was 20 years ago. It's pretty much every step of the way is known. You actually don't even need mountaineering skills anymore. You just need to how to use an ascender and pull yourself up on the rope. Truthfully, it's become an endurance test more than a mountaineering challenge. And it's still brutally hard, but it's not about rope work. It's not about mountaineering skills. It's about hooking yourself into the rope and putting one foot in front of the other.
And weathering, standing in place for 12 hours in the queue.
That's actually turned me off a lot, Stump, about it. It's no longer the wonderful adventure that I had in my mind when I was a kid watching, Jim Whittaker and pals in 1963. It's no longer like that. So it's so anyway, that was the point. Was I'd come so close to the 7 summits. I knew I could do Karstens. I haven't done that, but do I really want to finish the list? And so I went with the intent of seeing if I would do well at altitude, and I did. I got a lung infection, and so I didn't get a fair test, and I walked away thinking, I'm done with this. There's no chance. But that's always the way you feel. You have to turn around. And now 2 years later, I'm thinking, well, maybe I could, but I don't know. I don't know if I'm ever going to have the energy. And right now I'm so busy at work. I'd have to just give all that up and train for a year or two. And again, train for a year or two to stand in line, going up the Lhotse face behind 85 other guys who paid $50,000 to a guide. So I don't, at this point, I don't think that's on my agenda. But you know what I discovered when I was at Everest this year? There's about 100 destinations that are freaking great peaks to climb that are 20 to 23,000 feet, which is my comfort zone. And a never-ending amount of mountains right there under the crest of Everest. So it's a big world, and you never run out of things to do. It doesn't have to be about getting to the tops of the biggest ones. There's whole countries that are barely explored. Once you get off the beaten path, there's nobody there.
Yeah, that's the same concept in the whites. Like, once you get off the 4,000 footers, there's a million different little peaks and things like that. So I can only imagine what the Himalayas are like. Now, did you stay at base camp, or did you go through like the Khumbu icefall or anything like that?
I went into the icefall a little bit. I was with a group of Everest climbers actually who had been up there, who were scouting it out for a future Everest trip. I was actually with Peter Hillary, Edmund Hillary's son. Okay. And it was magnificent because we actually called this trek in the footsteps of Hillary. And it was magnificent walking in with Peter because every step of the way was a story about him or his father as kids. And it was, I'm a historian, and I love the history and the lore of the 1950s British expedition. So it was like heaven for me, really, seriously. It wasn't even, I lost interest in the climb and the hike, and just found it just so fascinating being there and listening to Peter and my friend Robert Mads Anderson, who's summited, I think, 4 times. So we walked in together with a great group of people, and it's just magnificent. And as I'm walking in, I saw 2 of the other peaks that have been on my must-do list for a long time. And I said, I don't have to get to the top of Everest. These will be totally sufficient if I go back.
I have a question for you. Since you've been there, what's your take on recovery of, hikers that are alive but unable to move, or bodies, this and that? There's a lot of controversy lately about how search and rescue applies to those higher summits. What's your take on that?
Well, it sounds cruel, but until you've been depleted by high altitude, I don't think you can appreciate how impossible it is to carry somebody down from the high peaks. from 29,000 feet, from 28,000 feet. It just can't be done. It can't be done in real time. You could go back and retrieve a body with a lot of people and a lot of resources, but everybody up there is on the edge of what they're capable of, even the Sherpas. I mean, some of them with full oxygen and have been up there 10 times. They're very depleted. You know what you notice when you get at altitude like that? Your hair stops growing, your fingernails stop growing, you stop digesting food. You're dying above 25,000 feet. And you're sitting there in those tents on the South Pole at 26,000 feet. Your body is eating itself alive. So it's a survival issue. And if you think you can rescue somebody without endangering your own life, I mean, it sounds really cruel, every man for himself. And at times you can help somebody, but I've been depleted at 23,000 feet where I couldn't move. And so I can only imagine being on the summit ridge trying to rescue someone. I just don't see how it can be done in real time.
I think most people understand that they're going into that with that possibility. And I suppose it comes down to the expectations that these guide companies set when you're heading out. I think legally you could attest to this, that the guide companies have to do that, and they have parameters that they have to work in. Is that the case?
Yeah. Everybody knows they're going into a potentially fatal situation. There's no question about it. But, you get summit fever and you're depleted and you just don't think right. I mean, even, you'd be totally wasted in the White Mountains and your brain isn't capable of making good decisions. Imagine being oxygen deprived for a month and you're just not all there.
Right. And your guides have to take care of you. That's their primary obligation.
Yeah.
What troubled me about the whole circumstance there now, guys, is the people signing up for these expeditions have not gone through the layer by layer preparation to get themselves there. Some people have done, all right, maybe I've climbed Mount Rainier 4 times and now I'm going to sign up for an Everest expedition because I happen to have $60,000 as a Microsoft vice president. I can pay for it. But, that's so risky, not knowing how your body's going to behave at altitude, not having the mountaineering experience on smaller peaks. And there's talk now of making sure that before they allow anybody to go on an Everest expedition, that they have to show them that they've climbed, I think it's a 6,000 meter or a 7,000 meter peak before, to demonstrate that they've at least got some capability of surviving up there, not creating a liability for themselves and others.
Yeah, I would think like somebody that's not experienced, it's dropping $60,000 on a guide and they're stepping away from their life for 2 or 3 months, like the especially people that are really sort of driven personalities, like they're going to cross that risk line without even thinking twice. So right. It's an interesting time. But Martin, and again, I'm not that interested in ever doing like Mount Everest, but for me, like the idea of trekking to base camp and going through sort of the country to get to base camp from Kathmandu is very interesting. Did you do that? Did you go the full way from Kathmandu to base camp, or how did you get there?
Kathmandu, you fly into a place called Lukla. It's the Hillary airstrip, Hillary Tenzing airstrip, actually, named after Edmund and then Tenzing Norgay, first astronomers. A little airstrip on a cliff, basically. It's thought of as the most dangerous airport in the world because there's lots of accidents, and there was one while we were there, strangely enough. And but we walked from there, and from there, Lukla to base camp is about 50 miles, I think. So we did a 50 mile in, 50 mile out.
Okay, so you can actually get closer to base camp. I always had it in my head that you had to fly into like the main city, and it was like a 1 week trip.
Yeah, like when the Americans on Everest 1963 expedition did it, they did have to walk from Kathmandu. It was like a month-long trek, and maybe even longer. But the funny thing is, those guys were super fit by the time they got there.
Oh yeah.
So that was an interesting process of getting themselves fit by basically walking 4,000, 5,000 vertical feet per day. And it's not easy walking through there. I mean, you really should do it. The White Mountains are actually great preparation for it because of the ruggedness. It's rugged like that. And it's beautiful country. Possibly, to my liking, a little too crowded now and maybe a little too connected, meaning there's internet service and cell phone service the whole way, which I found very disconcerting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, the other place I really wanted to talk to you about that you talked about in your book was the Matterhorn.
Sure.
And the reason I've always been fascinated with the Matterhorn is probably 3-4 years ago, there was like this viral video that went through YouTube and different social medias and media sites, and it was like this guy that was just going across the very top of the Matterhorn, and it was like this chunk of snow that he was walking across and I think the camera angles, like those GoPro cameras, make everything look a lot more narrow than they actually are, but it was like so freaky to me. Did you actually get all the way to the top of the Matterhorn, or did you just get up to like Hornley Hut, or can you talk a little bit about that?
I've climbed it to the summit 5 times. I've been on that ridge. And I have to tell you, I saw that video and I thought it was just ludicrously exaggerated in terms of the narrowness of the ridge.
Yeah.
I unroped. When I got to the top each time, I unroped and I walked along that ridge without a moment's hesitation, not feeling like I was literally balancing on a tightrope. It doesn't feel that way when you're there.
Okay.
It is a magnificent place. And the first time I went there to the summit, I got totally addicted to I don't know whether it's spiritual or the energy or the vibes I was getting from it, but it really was. They say energy concentrates at the top of some pointy mountains. It did for me, and it brought me back there 4 times.
And do you take the same route where you get to the Hornley Hut and then ascend from there? And how technical is it to actually get to the top?
Well, Hornley Hut is a hike, and I've been to that 4 times. I did it from the Italian side once. It was harder from the Italian side. It's interesting. The rock slopes differently. Matterhorn is the way the rock stratifies. It makes it harder from the Italian side. It's crumbling, but it's crumbling less on the Italian side. Anyway, so yeah, the route from the Hornley Ridge the Hornley Hut is called the Hornley Ridge. It's a crumbling mass of rock, and the analogy is it's like climbing Huntington Ravine 10 times. It's it's a little steeper in places, but it's like doing Huntington Ravine 10 times. It's 5,000 vertical feet. And there are places where the exposure is really extreme. I mean, you could fall 2,000 feet straight down the ridge. But the climb itself is about a 5.7, 5.5 rock climb at best. There's places where you don't need your hands. There's places where there's a couple of fixed ropes already built in because they're bottlenecks otherwise, and you pull yourself up. Yeah. So as climbs go, at this point, it isn't even particularly difficult. If you're super fit and you've got your brain trained not to be fear of heights, and you're real comfortable on rock, it's magnificent.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think the last area that I wanted to ask you about was Antarctica. So how do you get there? And can you talk a little bit about what you did when you got there?
Yeah, well, this was during my 7 summits phase, and Mount Vincent is one of the key summits. It's the least climbed, actually, because it is so hard to get to.
I can imagine.
In my case, I got on a plane at JFK. I flew to Miami. I flew to Santiago, Chile. I flew to Punta Arenas, Chile, and we boarded a plane called the Ice Princess in Punta Arenas, and it flew us across the Antarctic Ocean, landed in a place called Patriot Hills, which is a black ice airstrip, and then we got on a Twin Otter, a little Antarctic plane, and flew to the Vinson Range. So, yeah, a lot of planes. It took a long time to get there. So, but that is the appeal of it. It's a very isolated, difficult, infrequently climbed mountain. And I did it in, I think, 1992, November, December. And when I did it, I was the 123rd person to stand on the summit. So that tells you how infrequently was climbed before then. It's a logistical challenge. Not many people go there.
Now, when you get dropped off at the final airstrip, from the point where you get dropped off to the time that you summit and get back, like how many days are you talking to make that happen?
Let's say it was 20 days. We were on the ice by ourselves, and it wasn't an airstrip. It's a twin otter with skis.
Okay.
It's really fun. Really fun to land on skis. That's the way they do it in Alaska as well. It's the same kind of planes that fly in Alaska and the North Pole. Those pilots actually, migrate from the South Pole to the North Pole with the with the sun. So it's the same guys.
And back then, did you have like a satellite phone where you could, if something really went south, could you call them, or how did communication work?
No satellite phone. We had a radio that communicated with Patriot Hills, which was about 200 miles away. And we actually, unfortunately, one of my climbing buddies, his dad died, and they got him a message by radio. But no, there wasn't satellite phones back then. It was 92, 93. Now there are. Now my guy went to Everest a couple of years ago with literally his posting on Instagram from base camp last year. So, I mean, it's all different.
Wow.
It's all different.
Wow. So you've been all over the place, man. Like, Stump, this guy's like an animal.
Well, I was very driven in my 20s, 30s, and 40s to do the 7 summits. And as a result, you become, it's a very goal-driven behavior. And, I'm not that way now. I'm very serene about all this stuff now. I don't have that kind of intensity, and I've lost the mental edge and maybe a little bit of the physical edge too, because I'm just not out there doing it, training the way I used to. But you're kind of like in the zone at a point.
It's probably like Stomp, like it's sort of like what you talked about too, is like it's sort of the equivalent of like the ultra athletes that push it too hard. Like if they don't know when to dial it back, then the long game gets lost. So Martin, you're probably like doing this because like, if you kept pushing this and tried to do like Everest when you weren't, you sense sort of like maybe it's not within your comfort zone, like you push it too hard and you end up being like one of those guys that you were talking about that you just can't get them down off the mountain. So it's probably a good call. You work within your limits.
Part of what slowed me down, guys, is I have 2 kids, and my daughter was born. It kind of slowed me down a little bit. It just changed me, and that's when I started slowing down. My son was different because I wanted him to come with me. I mean, when he was 13, I took him to Kilimanjaro, and we did rock climbing in Boulder, and I turned him into a mini me. Different with my daughter. For some reason, she didn't like that, but I didn't want to kill myself at that point. So I started to slow down, And work got busy. I never really quit. I never really gave it everything. Some of my climbing friends, who've done Everest multiple times, or many the 14. I got some friends who've done the 14 8,000 meter peaks. They gave up everything else in their lives: family, friends, jobs, and I never did it that much. I never put it out there that far.
Got it. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting life, and the book is great. Again, I really enjoyed reading it. It's called Martin Pazzani, Secrets of Aging Well, Get Outside, and the whole concept is around how hiking is the fountain of youth. And I'm definitely in agreement with a lot of the themes and a lot of the points that you made. And I just want to tell the audience, like, Martin is not sort of, the concepts that he's talking about. I've been sort of in the corporate HR world for many years, and probably about 10, 12 years ago, like if you went back, like there was never this idea of sort of having a wellness division within a company, but more and more you see big companies have these larger wellness divisions. So companies are buying into this idea as well, that like they want to make sure that they're doing preventative and not just waiting for a pill to solve everything. So hiking is something that I think is definitely a path to, maintaining that wellness for a long period of time. So Martin, it's been great talking with you. Is there any other anything you want to plug or anything else you want to talk about before we? And I want you to stick around. We got a search and rescue that we got to talk about, and we want to talk a little bit about White Mountain history too.
Yeah, whenever I do these, I just like to remind people that you can take charge of the way you age, and it's all up to you. I mean, it's in control. Some of it's genetics, but if you stay active and physically fit, chances are you can live a happier, healthier, longer life. That's my message, and that's what the book is about. It's not about climbing Mount Everest. It's about the baby steps to get you to a happier, healthier, longer life.
Yeah, no, it's a great book, and I'll make sure that I put the details in the show notes, and I can coordinate with you to plug anything else in the show notes that you want me to put in there.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. So I wanted to cover 2 more things, and again, Martin, stick around and you can hop in if anything comes up you want to talk about. But the first thing I want to talk about, Stomp, is there was a incident on Mount Carrigain Not Carrigain, not Carrigain. About a search and rescue that we didn't cover in the last episode, and unfortunately, this was a hiker fatality. So this happened, I think, going back on July 26th or 27th, where there was some sort of an incident. I don't know if it was I don't know exactly what happened, but there was an incident where a hiker was found unconscious and not breathing. There was some hikers on the scene that tried to perform CPR, but when emergency crews did arrive, they pronounced the hiker as dead, and they had to do a carry out of the body, and it was quite a long carry out. I think about 9 hours. They said for them to get the body out through steep, rough terrain. So
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to cover that one with Chris from Solo, but that's the only search and rescue that I've had this week that I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, those are most of the details. Unconscious hiker. We had Fish and Game, Bartlett Fire, U.S. Forest Service Solo, Lakes Region Search and Rescue helped out. Apparently they tried CPR by the hikers, actually. The hikers initiated CPR on the unconscious hiker. That was terminated by EMS personnel. And Signal Ridge is tough. I mean, that's a 10-mile round trip. So it took about 9 hours to carry the deceased out. It's a long day. It's tough for everybody, rescuers and family.
Yeah, I can imagine. I know on social media, one of the hikers that was on scene had mentioned, she didn't give a lot of details just for the sort of out of respect for the family, but she did mention that, she was there and one of the folks that had sort of tried to help out at the scene. But unfortunately, Martin, I know as much as we talk about sort of this idea of sort of anti-aging, we also talked about like you can't control everything, and sometimes medical issues happen, and there's not much you can do about it. So you want to make the best of life in every moment you can.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that's one of the reasons we do these things, right? I mean, we're trying to live life as opposed to, there's that fear of missing out thing that's going around social media. I think I think it's FOMO. Yeah, I like to think the opposite, FOBA, which is the joy of being outside, is what offsets that. Is there's just an awful lot of joy to be had by being out there. So Jobo, I call it Jobo. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Finding those, there's not as many of them as there used to be, but like finding those corners of the whites where there's no cell connection and no temptation to grab your phone. So, good point.
Let's dive into some White Mountains history, shall we?
Stump, I wanted to move on to last subject here. So I think it was like 2 or 3 episodes ago, we were talking about, who's that guy? English Jack, the Hermit of Crawford, Crawford Notch. So remember we were talking about how he worked for the P&O Railroad, and you were like, is it the Portland and Oregon Railroad? Yes. I did a little bit of research for it.
I thought it was. Yeah.
It's not. Okay. It is the Portland and Ogdensburg Railroad. So Ogdensburg, New York is in the Great Lakes.
Interesting.
So P&O Railroad was set up to connect from Portland, Maine to the Great Lakes. And it also was basically when they put the P&O Railroad in place, that was the first time that you could actually come up from Boston to the White Mountains in a day. And I think for them a day meant probably about a 20-hour trip from Boston to get up to Portland and then take the railroad. Yeah. But it was Portland and Ogdensburg. And this was an important railroad because I guess it was chartered in 1867. And again, the focus was to connect Portland, Maine to Ogdensburg, New York, which would connect the Great Lakes to the seacoast. And over time, the section that we probably care about the most in Crawford Notch, I think happened so the track from Portland reached Conway in 1871, and then it reached Bartlett in 1873. And I don't know, Martin, you talked about how you had carried out on Frankenstein. I don't know if it's the same exact path that it follows right now, but it finally hit Crawford Notch. So they call it, Crawford Notch it's known as Fabian, I guess, which is right where Brenton Woods is. But it reached that Brenton Woods area in 1875. And from there, it eventually connected through in 1876 to Ogdensburg. And that's when sort of the floodgates opened up in the White Mountains, and where the tourists really were able to access the White Mountains in a day. And I think, Martin, it was probably at that period where a lot of those huge resort hotels that you were talking about, where most of them had burned down, were all started to, they were built around that time, or maybe a little bit before or after.
Well, now I know why that restaurant down there is called Fabian's, right? That's
right.
obviously attributed to that, right?
Yeah. So Fabian, that's like right where Brenton Woods is, and that's where the first train arrived there on August 7th in it looks like 1875, and that's pretty much when Crawford Notch and the White Mountains cracked open to tourism. And there was a guy, Dr. Samuel Bemis, who owned all of that property, and he was a big sort of gung-ho, like let's get the railroad in here. So he sold all of his land to give easements to the railroad for like $1, and he had the construction crews living in his Crawford Tavern, and he was the guy that really focused on getting that railroad put in place. So
rowdy times.
Yeah. So that answers that question, Stomp. Now it's Ogdensburg. So, and I think
So that's like a 1-to-1 ratio, isn't it? It's like a 1 mile per year.
Well, I don't know.
That's some hard work, man.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, I'm assuming going through, like, from Bartlett up to Brenton Woods is a huge, like, elevation gain. So I'm sure it wasn't easy.
Oh yeah. It's amazing. That's at least 10 miles.
Yeah, exactly. And just talking about how we were talking about Carrigain before, that's right around the time where Livermore was at its largest number. It was like 200-300 people. So when you hike into Mount Carrigain, on the left-hand side is where the remains of Livermore are. So have you ever seen Livermore before, Stomp?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah, fascinating. Yeah. Ghost town.
Exactly. So there you go, Stomp. You got your little history lesson is Ogdensburg instead of Oregon.
I thought for sure it was going to be Oregon, but oh well.
But this is good stuff. So Martin, thanks again for joining us, and I guess that's it. We'll call it a wrap.
Awesome. You guys are doing some good stuff. Really enjoy it, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to learn more about the topics covered on today's show, please check out the show notes and safety information on SLASRpodcast.com. That's SLASR podcast.com. You can also follow the show on Facebook and Instagram. We hope you'll join us next week for another great show. Until next time, on behalf of Mike and Stomp, get out there and crush some peaks.
Now covered in scratches, blisters, and bug bites, Chris Staff wanted to complete his most challenging day hike ever.
Fish and Game officers say the hiker from Florida activated an emergency beacon yesterday morning. He was hiking along the Appalachian Trail when the weather started to get worse. Officials say the snow was piled up to 3 feet in some spots, and there was a wind chill of -1 degree.
And there's 3 words that describe this race. Do we all know what they are? Only one hill!
Here's Lieutenant James Neeland, New Hampshire Fish and Game. Lieutenant, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
What are some of the most common mistakes you see people make when they're heading out on the trails to hike here in New Hampshire?
It seems to me the most common is being unprepared, and I think if they just simply visited hikesafe.com and got a list of the 10 essential items and had those in their packs, they probably would have no need to ever call us at all.